As we start our sermon this morning, I want to ask you a question. Do you ever feel like your Christianity consists of a bunch of rules to live by? Do you ever feel like your Christianity is just some truths to believe in? Maybe some steps to take? Do you ever feel like it's hard to try to just do enough? You feel like you just can't do enough to be the person, to be the Christian that you ought to be. You ever look at your life and wonder why God would even want you to be a part of His family? I mean, I look at my life and I see all the failures. And to be quite honest with you, my failures far outweigh my strengths or my wins. Do you ever feel like you just aren't getting where you need to be in your walk with the Lord? Like it's just got stale and stagnant, and you're not moving in the way you should. Like you're on a spiritual treadmill. Funny thing about treadmills is that I think I'm a little hot. You might want to turn me down a little. If you want to do a little exercise, it's fun to walk on a treadmill, but unfortunately many people look at their religion like they're running on a treadmill going nowhere. In fact, I think that's a pretty good image of how many people approach the Christian life. In fact, it's a pretty good image if you take into consideration the history behind the treadmill. In Victorian England, treadmills weren't found in air-conditioned health clubs. A treadmill was found in a prison. In fact, treadmills were called treadwheels back then, and they were part of a penal servitude found only as a form of punishment. Now, some treadmills were productive, grinding wheat, transporting water, but others were purely punitive. Prisoners were punished by spending the bulk of their day walking up an inclined plane, knowing that all of their hard work was for nothing. The only hope the prisoner had was that some future day their debt would be paid to society and they would be set free. At the end of the day, he couldn't even look at his labor and say, I accomplished something. He hadn't been productive. As you struggle to be the Christian you think you should be, it is important to remember that Christ didn't come to save you because you were that good. Christ came to save you because you need Him desperately. He came to seek and to save the lost. He came as a doctor to the sick. He came to find me. And He came to find you. In fact, He came to find all of us and save us from our works-oriented mindset, calling us to a relationship with Him. If you were to look across the entirety of the world and all of the world's religions, you would find that all of them have some list, some guidelines, some form of expectations that they expect all of their followers to live up to. And if they live up to those things, then they will receive some sort of reward. Islam, Hindu, Buddhist, Sikh, and every other religion for that matter, promotes the idea that if you can follow a list of rules, that somehow you will find reward, somehow you will find enlightenment, somehow you will find a heaven of some sort. Every religion stands on the idea that if you do enough, you can make yourself good enough, all except Christianity. Christianity destroys the treadmill that is built on our effort. It shreds the idea that there is a good column and a bad column, and as long as your good column outweighs your bad, that you can get in. It just shreds that. Christ came to set us free. Christ came to change us. Christ came to transform His followers. Christ came today into our lives at this moment so that we could understand in a greater way what He has to offer us. I want you to turn with me to Matthew chapter 11. If you have your Bible, it'll be on the screen. Matthew chapter 11. I want you to listen to Christ's call to all of us. This is what he says. Matthew chapter 11, the very last 3 verses. Jesus is speaking. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Today, as we look at this text, I want us to experience the joys of transformation. I want us to understand in this text, there are some transforming moments that can just provide us a joy no matter what our circumstances are. And I want you to encourage you to grab hold of these things and hold them in your life because they change who we are from the inside. And the first one is this: transformation is a result of relationship. Jesus calls us to come to me. You might think those 3 words aren't that important, but they're extremely important. Jesus says, what I want you to do is come to me. I'm calling you to intimacy. I'm calling you to relationships. I'm calling you to come close and then find the promise of transformation in me. That's what Jesus says. I want you to come to me. It is important for us this morning to understand that transformation is not an act of our will, but it is a yielding of our will to God. I want you to understand that transformation is a result of relationship with Jesus Christ. David had got caught in sin. And in Psalm 51 verse 10, he writes these words. I want you to listen to him. Here are David's words. Psalm 51 verse 10, he says, "Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me." David understood, I need to change. I need to be transformed. But he also understood that he could not do it. It had to do with God providing in his life. He needed a complete makeover. He had surrendered to lust, which resulted in adultery and eventually murder, and he knew that only God could transform him from that. He knew that only God could save him from himself, fix the situation. It all rested in God, not in David. To be quite honest, that is all of us. It is our relationship with God that changes us. We don't earn it. We don't deserve it. We just receive it by getting close to God and accepting the grace that He has given us. Some of my favorite verses are found in Ephesians chapter 2. I want to read to you just 2 of them this morning, verses 8 and 9. In Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, Paul is talking to us, and he's trying to remind us that we can't do enough on our own, but God can. In fact, this is how he says it. He says, "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith. And this not from yourself. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." He wants us to understand that God is who changes us. That is important. Transformation comes through relationship. Me and Suze were talking to a few people the other day, and when I first showed up at her parents' doorstep, I was a completely different person. I can describe that person to you, but it's really not that important what I look like. Just to give you a small glimpse into my father-in-law's mindset about me, his nickname for me, which he didn't call me this to my face, but his nickname for me was Tinkerbell. I don't know if it was the long hair or the earrings that got him thinking that way, but one or the other. That was way back when, 20 plus years ago. Maybe I still have that nickname, I don't know. Listen, it's important you understand something. My relationship with my wife transformed me. I'm a better person because she is my wife. I can't tell you how many times I have felt like this isn't going to happen, and her belief in me gave me confidence. I can't tell you how many times I thought, there's no way, but her support in me gave me boldness. I can't tell you how many times I was somewhat depressed, but her joy gave me joy. I want you to understand, relationship transforms people. And Jesus says, come to me and watch what I can do. Watch what I can do in your life. Enjoy the transformation that comes only through me, he says. Transformation is a result of relationship. The second thing that we need to understand about transformation is that transformation is from the inside out. Now, I love how Jesus puts it here in our passage, in our text here. He says, you will find rest for your souls. Rest for your souls. Now, you have to think about that word a little bit, but I think we can all manage to grab hold of the essence of what Jesus is saying there. When he says, rest for your soul, what he's essentially saying is, hey, I'm going to trade your worry and make it peace. I'm going to transform you from the inside out. I'm going to take your heart and I'm going to take your mind, those things that dictate our feelings and our thoughts and our actions. And Jesus says, I'm going to transform them with my power. I'm going to make your logic and your emotion depend on me. Jesus, in fact, tells us repeatedly through Scripture that He, God, is the only one who really can change us. But it all comes from the heart and from the mind. In fact, Paul in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, talking about the mind, says it like this. Romans chapter 12, verse 2, he says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. I see it like this. Jesus calls us to come to Him and He says, I'm going to give you rest for your soul. If you come to me, I'm going to change all those things that make you anxious, that make you really have anxiety in life. He says, if you come to me, I'm going to take away the worldly perspective and I'm going to replace it with the mind of Christ, which Paul says elsewhere. It is so important that we be changed from the inside out. I thought about this. How many people look good on the outside, but they don't like themselves on the inside? You know, how many people have been successful in this world, yet they're trapped by depression? How many people have spent so much time trying to hone the outside that they forgot about the inside? And the inside is stealing away their joy. Jesus says, I'm going to transform you from the inside out. I'm going to change your thinking. I'm going to change your emotions. You're going to be focused on others. His loving relationship transforms our hearts and our minds. We find ourselves being valued by Jesus, and then we recognize that if we're valued that much by Him, that we must be valuable. And it transforms us from the inside out. In Matthew chapter 22, Jesus is asked about the greatest commandments. This is His reply. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Now we know those two things, but He goes on in verse 40 and says, all the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. I want you to understand, when our hearts and minds are focused on God and on others, there's no need for any kind of rule book. Because if you truly care about others, if you've truly been transformed and your thoughts and your mind is for their best interest, you're not going to do any of those things that need to be commanded. You're not going to steal from them. You're not going to murder them. You're not going to lie to them. Because you've been transformed from the inside out. There is a joy in knowing that our hearts and minds are Christ's, and we've been freed from the worldly perspective that so inundates our society. That leads me to our last point this morning about transformation, and that is this: transformation frees us to live. It frees us to live. What does Jesus promise to give us? He says, I'll give you rest from your troubles and burdens. What He really says is, I'm going to free you from all these distractions, from all these issues, so that you can really live. See, we're not just changed within. He doesn't just take our hearts and transform them or take our minds and transform them. He changed the way we act toward others. We live completely differently because we're a Christian. At least we should. In fact, I like how Paul says it in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. He says, now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we, who with unveiled faces all reflect the Lord's glory, are being transformed into His likeness with ever-increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. Paul starts off and he says, there is freedom in the Spirit of the Lord. The Spirit of the Lord transforms you, makes you more and more like Jesus Christ all the time, because there is a power that comes from God's Spirit residing within us. If you are not excited by those verses, I don't know what will excite you. You have been set free by the Spirit to live for the Lord. In fact, you've been set free by the Spirit to live more and more like the Lord each and every day of your life. Think about that. It doesn't depend on your strength, your effort. It doesn't even depend on how many abilities you have. All it depends on is your surrender to the Holy Spirit's guidance in your life. Our circumstances, failures, struggles, weaknesses, they do not dictate to us whether we will find peace. What determines if we have found peace or not is whether we have yielded to the Spirit. Then we are free. One of my favorite verses, Philippians 4:4, rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. God tells us you should be joyful in every circumstance because you have a relationship with me. It should free you to live for me. We've been transformed. Circumstances no longer dictate our joy. There's a book by the name of When Helping Hurts. And in that book there's this story. I want to read it to you. It says, one Sunday I was visiting one of Africa's largest slums, the massive Kibera slum of Nairobi, Kenya. The conditions were simply inhumane. People lived in shacks constructed out of cardboard boxes. Foul smells gushed out of open ditches carrying human and animal excrement. And I thought to myself, this place is completely God-forsaken. Then, to my amazement, right there among the dung, I heard the sound of a familiar hymn. You see, every Sunday, 30 slum dwellers crammed into a 10 by 20 foot, quote, sanctuary to worship God. The church was made out of cardboard boxes that had been opened up and stapled to studs. It wasn't pretty, but it was a church made up of some of the poorest people on earth. I was immediately asked to preach a sermon. So I quickly jotted down some notes and was looking forward to teaching the congregation about the sovereignty of God. But before the sermon began, I listened as some of the poorest people on the planet cried out to God, Jehovah Jireh, please heal my son as he is going blind. Merciful Lord, please protect me when I go home today, for my husband always beats me. Sovereign King, please provide my children with enough food today as they are hungry. He goes on, he says, as I listened to their heartfelt prayers, I thought about my ample salary, my life insurance policy, my health insurance policy, my 2 cars, my house, and on and on and on. And I realized that I do not really trust in God's sovereignty on a daily basis. I have buffers in place to shield me from most economic shocks. I realize that when these folks pray, give us this day our daily bread, their minds don't wander as mine so often does. I realize that these slum dwellers were trusting in God's sovereignty just to get them through the day. And they had a far deeper intimacy with God than I probably will ever have in my entire life. I read that story because I believe we can learn a lot from these poorest of the poor. I believe we can learn a lot about what it means to be transformed by Christ. Even in the midst of the worst situation imaginable, these people found strength in the Lord. They found joy and worship in the midst of a dump. Transformation is not about a change in circumstance. Transformation is about a change in us, based completely upon our relationship with God. God promises to change our hearts and minds. He promises to free us from the concerns of this world. He promises that if we will stay close to Him, He will give us opportunity to live for Him. He doesn't just invite us in to follow a list of rules. He calls us to follow Him. He calls us to be transformed. He calls us to change completely. Matthew 11, verse 28. Come to me, Jesus says, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Have you come to Jesus like that?